Hello, everyone. It has been a hot minute since I've made a video, and I wanted to do something a little bit different than the normal sort of theology, philosophy podcast that I typically do. Um, for those of you who know me, you might know that I'm a political science major, and so I do have a heart for politics and keeping up with the news. And so I know that that's a very divisive topic right now, but we're in an unprecedented time in our nation's history where a former president of the United States, Donald Trump, is currently under indictment and undergoing a trial in New York and Manhattan for alleged hush money payments and falsifying business records. And so this has been all over the news, but a lot of people don't really seem to be following or seem to be aware of what the evidence is because the trial is not recorded. It's just brought about by the media. So I've tried the best I can to accumulate in this video, in this presentation, all of the evidence on both sides to the best of my ability. And in this video, I'm not here to give my personal opinions. I'm not here to give the opinions or positions of anyone affiliated with any particular party or any particular organization. I just wanted to go and give as objective as I can look at the evidence presented by the prosecutors and by the defense arguments given by Trump's attorneys. And so I will let you, the viewer, come to your own conclusions, but I wanted to just give a fair shakedown and look at both sides as fair as we can with such a polarizing topic. So with that, we will go ahead and start the presentation. All right, so the Trump hush money trial, what exactly are we looking at regarding charges? So Trump is being charged on the state level in Manhattan by Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, who is pictured right there. He's being charged with 34 counts of falsifying business records, and that includes invoices, checks, and other statements, which in New York is a Class E, or sorry, which is a misdemeanor, typically in New York, just falsifying business records. However, if you can attach that to a second crime or intention to commit a second crime, it then becomes a Class E felony, which could have up to 4 years in prison under conviction, although typically first-time offenders would not get nearly that much. There's a good chance if Trump is found guilty, he could be given probation or a fine or perhaps home confinement. Most commentators don't think it's very likely he'll actually be in prison. But regardless, this kind of crime technically could get up to 4 years in prison in New York. And so the prosecutors have to show, one, that Trump was part of a scheme to intentionally and knowingly falsify business records, and that he was doing this in order to hide a second crime. Often in New York City, this is done to hide, financial crimes like tax evasion and so forth. But it can be any crime. And so prosecutors are really focusing here on saying that Trump was trying to commit violate election laws, both federal and state. And there's a particular citation there in New York law that says that one's not allowed to unlawfully try to affect the results of an election or support a candidate illegally. And so that is what Bragg's team is arguing that Trump and his co-conspirators committed. So the prosecution's case, we have pictured here Joshua Steinglass on the left, who's the most experienced prosecutor and the one who's sort of leading this effort. You have Matthew Coangelo, who used to work at the federal DOJ, Department of Justice, and now is with the Manhattan DA's office. And you have Susan Hoffinger on the right, who I believe was a former defense attorney, but now is a prosecutor. So she's particularly well known for cross-examination. So each of these have a role in the prosecution. These are the three main prosecutors, although I think that there's at least over a dozen working on this case in total. So there's really three parts to this. First part is the background and the alleged conspiracy to have a catch and kill scheme. The second part is the actual crime that's being charged with the counts, which is the alleged falsification of business records. And then the third part is the alleged effort to try to suppress Cohen and try to pressure him into not giving information. We'll go through all of that and get into that. So first we have part one, which is the background alleged conspiracy. So all of this that's about to go over is not the crime that Trump is being charged with, but it is important background information that prosecutors are bringing to the jury. And I should say, for the sake of this, all of the evidence that I will be showing today, I believe, in this slideshow is evidence that's given to the jury. So I'm just giving a summation of the prosecutor's case, and I'll give a summation of the defense's case. So the videos, documents, and all that I'll be showing are the stuff that the jurors will have access to and that the prosecutors presented in their case. So first we have a timeline. We're going to try to go chronological order. So in June 2015, Trump announces his candidacy for president of the United States. In August, which is 2 months after that, Trump has a meeting at Trump Tower with David Pecker, who's a longtime friend of his, and Michael Cohen. who is his fixer and his attorney. Now, Michael Cohen will be very prevalent in this case, and we'll see more from him in a minute. But this meeting was, according to Cohen and David Pecker, both of whom testified, was to help establish this catch and kill scheme to help Trump's campaign. So Pecker testifies that when they met, Trump was basically asking the company that Pecker owns, which is American Media Corporation, which includes the National Enquirer, a famous tabloid magazine, to help with his campaign. So Pecker agreed, because he's a longtime friend of Trump, to help buy out any damaging stories that could come. So if people had damaging stories to Trump's campaign, he would buy it and suppress it and not publish it, whereas he would also publish stories helping Trump's campaign. So here we have a few examples where the National Enquirer was publishing stories, pretty outlandish ones at Trump's campaign opponents at the time. So you have Hillary Clinton, Marco Rubio, Ben Carson, etc. And these are all just really sleazy tabloid accusations, right? But nonetheless, these are the stories that the National Enquirer was publishing during the election in order to help Trump win, sort of at Trump's behest, since he had met with Pecker to discuss this. And of course, the National Enquirer also tried to make Trump himself look good. It endorsed him for president, gave articles. I believe the prosecutors showed one magazine from the National Enquirer that said Trump was the healthiest person to ever run for president. I don't think that I have a picture of that, but that is what most of the news outlets said. So I'm sorry I couldn't find that image. But you can see very one-sided, very biased tabloid journalism in favor of Trump that Trump allegedly had negotiated with Pecker to do. And Trump himself would cite the National Enquirer during his campaign. Particularly and most infamously was the case with Ted Cruz's father, which the National Enquirer argued was involved in the JFK assassination by talking to Lee Harvey Oswald right before it happened. Now, of course, that's nonsense, but Trump was arguing to press that this should be taken very seriously because the National Enquirer reported it. And in hindsight, we now know from the testimony of Michael Cohen and David Pecker that this was in part solicited by Trump. So here's a brief video of the press where Trump is discussing this and acting as if people should take the National Enquirer seriously on this effort to hurt Cruz's campaign.
This man is a pathological liar.
Ted Cruz erupts after Donald Trump links Cruz's father to none other than JFK assassin Lee Harvey Oswald.
His father was with Lee Harvey Oswald prior to Oswald being, shot. I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. What is this, right prior to his being shot? And nobody even brings it up. I mean, they don't even talk about that. That was reported, and nobody talks about it.
Trump made the explosive allegations in a live phone call on Fox and Friends, basing them on a report in last week's National Enquirer. Ted Cruz's father linked to JFK assassination. The tabloid, which is supporting Trump for president, claims this man is Ted Cruz's father, Raphael, handing out leaflets with Oswald in August 1963, 3 months before President Kennedy was assassinated.
What was he doing with Lee Harvey Oswald shortly before the death, before the shooting? It's impossible.
Donald's source for this is the National Enquirer. The National Enquirer is tabloid trash.
He finishes though by saying tabloid trash, it cuts off of the video. So all of this is sleazy, and none of it is technically illegal, but it does go to show sort of the sketchiness of that campaign and the tactics that were being used at the time. But now we get into the actual background that's relevant to this case. So we know that there was this agreement between AMI, which owns the National Enquirer, which David Pecker owns, and Donald Trump and Trump's attorney, Michael Cohen, to help do this for the election. So that was the part where the National Enquirer was helping Trump's campaign by publishing negative stories about his opponents and publishing favoring stories about himself. But the National Enquirer also agreed to help suppress negative stories that would potentially hurt Trump's campaign. So the first instance of this was just a few months after that meeting in November 2015, when a former doorman of Trump Tower, Dino Sajudin, claimed that he had information about an alleged affair that Trump had had where he had gotten one of his employees pregnant, and that there was a child out of wedlock that belonged to Trump that Trump denied. So Michael Cohen, Trump's attorney, hears about this. He contacts David Pecker, says, hey, David, with our agreement, you need to go buy this story and suppress it. So the National Enquirer in October investigates this. In November, they end up paying Sajudin $30,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement to keep quiet about this and not say anything to anyone, not release this to the press. The National Enquirer did not believe this story was credible at the time, and pretty much everyone agreed that it wasn't credible, that there was no evidence of this at all. But Cohen said, if you're going to get rid of it, if you're going to get your money back and get rid of the NDA, just wait till after the election, because then it won't matter. So that sort of goes to show that this was campaign related. And then there's a second hush money payment. So about 6 or 7 months after that, we have in June 2016, another story about an affair comes about to Michael Cohen in the National Enquirer. Karen McDougal, who was a Playboy bunny who had been on an episode of The Apprentice, I think she was one of the background characters. She alleged that she had had a several months long, I think it was close to a year long affair with Donald Trump on and off. It was a romantic affair behind Melania's back, and they allegedly had multiple sexual experiences and so forth. So Karen McDougal comes to the National Enquirer after one of her friends sort of tries to get the story out of the way. And Michael Cohen tells David Pecker that he needs to have the National Enquirer buy the story off to suppress it. So the National Enquirer and Pecker and AMI work out a deal with Karen McDougal's attorney and herself to pay her $150,000 to keep quiet. And they also sign her on with the agreement where she can start writing stories with the National Enquirer. Now, the National Enquirer did not publish any of these stories, but that was part of the agreement that she would sign a non-disclosure form, she'd be paid money, and that she would sign this licensing agreement. And so again, this was meant to suppress the story. They're not buying it to publish it. The National Enquirer is buying the story so that they can have the rights to it, so that no one else can get it, and they'll never publish it so that it will not hurt Trump's campaign. So that is how that generally goes with that. So now we've had two payments so far. We had the one to Dino Sajudin, and we had one to Stormy Daniels, both of which were negotiated by Cohen and ultimately paid for by David Pecker and AMI, which Trump had sort of set up at the beginning, allegedly, in the August meeting. So now we get to our this first video piece of evidence that is discussing this meeting. So on September 6th, Michael Cohen would actually go and record a conversation he had with Trump with his phone. Now, Trump was not aware this was being recorded. According to Cohen, he was recording this because David Pecker was at this point getting annoyed that Trump had not paid him back yet for these two payments. He had paid the $30,000 and he paid the $150,000 for these two, and Trump had not reimbursed him, and he was frustrated. So Cohen's like, "Don't worry, David. I'll show you evidence. I'm talking about this. We're gonna get it paid back. We're gonna get this meeting worked out." But so this recording, according to Cohen, was recorded without telling Trump so that he could have evidence to give to Pecker to say, "Hey, look, we're negotiating this. Trump's aware of it. We're going to take care of it. Just hold on a little bit and we'll get you your money." So this is the recording that Cohen recorded that's shown to jurors. And it's usually considered one of the more interesting pieces of evidence because it shows Michael Cohen and Donald Trump discussing this payment to Karen McDougal. And you'll see in this video, they discuss how much she's going to get paid, $150,000, and Trump allegedly tells Cohen to pay it in cash, which seems like it wouldn't leave a paper trail.
Told you about Charleston. I need to open up a company for the transfer of all of that info regarding our friend David, so that I'm going to do that right away. I've actually come up and I've spoken to Alan Weisselberg about how to set the whole thing up with funding. Yes, and it's all the stuff because you never know where that company, you never know what he's going to be. So I'm all over that, and I spoke to Alan about it when it comes time for the financing, which will be what financing? We'll have to pay. So no. I got no.
So again, I know the audio is a little hard to hear that, but the transcripts of this have Cohen meeting with Trump saying, "Hey, look, about that payment that we had with our friend David," which is David Pecker. I've talked to Alan Weisselberg. I'm going to set up a company, which would be an LLC that Cohen has set up, and we're going to wire this money through there. And Trump says, "How much is it going to be? 150?" Cohen says, "Yes." Trump says, "Yeah, I've been thinking about that." And then Cohen says, "Well, here's how we're going to finance it." And Trump says, "What financing?" Cohen says, "Well, we're gonna have to pay it," and Trump says, "No, just pay it in cash." And Cohen says, "No, we're gonna just do it through this wire transfer." And so the notable thing here is it shows that Trump was aware of the payment to McDougal. He at least shows somewhat. He doesn't say, "What are you talking about?" He seems to know the amount that's going to be paid and the general arrangements of it. And he also seems to have a desire to want to pay this in cash to keep this more subtle, to not have a paper trail that can be tracked. So this is not direct evidence for the falsification of business records, as we'll see coming up, but it is background evidence, again, to show Trump's knowledge of the general arrangement that was had and to show Trump's intent. So all of this is relevant as background information when we get to the actual crime that's being purported by prosecutors. So We come back to that. So now we skip to October 8th, 2016. So this is after, so Karen McDougal at this point has been paid and her through her lawyer, Keith Davidson. And so in October, we have this infamous Hollywood Access tape, Access Hollywood tape, I'm sorry, drop. This is a tape that pretty much everyone has seen, so I'm not going to play the audio from it because it's pretty vulgar, but it was a tape from 2005 where Trump was bragging about grabbing women without their consent, arguably, and it made him look in a really bad position. And so, according to the testimony of Hope Hicks, who testified before the jury and was one of Trump's former press aides, this was devastating when this came out. The Trump team was panicking. How are we going to resolve this? And Trump was tanking in the poll numbers. Lots of Republicans were calling for him to resign. This was easily the worst moment of his campaign. And this was only a month out before the election, which was on November 8th. So this could not have come at a worse time. And Trump campaign was in damage control mode. And so that was bad enough. And so while this is happening, even more bad news happens when Cohen finds out that there's another story about an affair that involves allegedly Donald Trump by a adult film star named Stormy Daniels. Now, Stormy had already published this story back in 2011 on a website called The Dirty, and it had been discussed in Life and Style magazine. But Trump's attorneys at the time had just threatened to sue her, and so she dropped the story. But they didn't really make much of it back of that day. So the story comes up again now since there's renewed interest given the Access Hollywood tape in the election. And so now we're a month out from the election. Trump has had all this criticism from this video that comes out, and his view of women in the public eye is not very high. On top of this, other women have come out and accused him of sexual assault and groping, and so Trump is doing as much damage control as he can. So you can imagine, given the Trump campaign's panic, now when they hear about yet another potential scandal involving a woman, involving a sexual affair, this has got to be stopped before this becomes public, because Trump has already had so much baggage at this point. This would only make things worse. And so Cohen goes to David Pecker and says, hey, you all need to buy out this story. You already bought out Karen McDougal and Dino's Sajudin story. You need to do this one. Pecker says, no, I'm not a bank anymore. This is according to Pecker's testimony. I'm not a bank. I'm not going to be paying you anymore. Trump hasn't paid me back for the first 2 times. Forget it. And Pecker also insinuated that he had found out from his other editors and his lawyers that he felt that this was technically illegal because since Pecker and AMI were helping Trump's campaign, that would technically be an undisclosed campaign finance violation, which would be a violation of federal election law, FEC law, because corporations are not allowed to give directly to campaigns of presidents, and there's limitations to how much people can give. So it's a few thousand things to that 2,000 or 3,000, and these payments were far bigger than that, 30,000, 150,000. So that's another one, and they weren't disclosed. So on many counts, what AMI was doing was pretty much illegal in their eyes, and so they're like, you know what? Don't worry about paying us back. We're not going to help you out anymore, but we're going to try to distance ourselves and cover our tracks. This was not a good idea. So Cohen is now stuck at a loss because AMI is not willing to buy out the Stormy Daniels story. And so he now is sort of struggling. So he goes and he emails and communicates with Stormy Daniels' lawyer, Keith Davidson. And so they're working out the arrangement of this payment. And this is one of the emails dated to October 11th, and they're discussing this. They agree that she's going to be paid $130,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement to keep silent and not speak of this affair. Now, what's interesting is that it mentions in this email here, Ms. Daniels expressed dissatisfaction with your schedule of a delay of 10 days for funding. To that end, you'll see that I placed this Friday, 10/14/16, as the funding deadline. Let me know if this is a problem. Keith Davidson would testify to the jury that Cohen routinely tried to delay this payment until after the election and was slow-footing it. And Davidson and Daniels are not having it. They're like, no, you got to pay us now. We're going to come out and say something. Because they knew that once the election was over, this would not be as valuable because Trump's campaign wouldn't be necessary anymore. He would have already won if he ended up winning. And so Cohen tried to delay this, but they weren't buying it. And so eventually Cohen had to cave and ended up paying them. So Cohen would end up making this payment of his own money. Oh, hold on, I'm skipping this part. So before Cohen makes this payment on July 24th to 26th, he would make several calls to Keith Schiller, who was Trump's bodyguard. And so you can see all these call logs here, and these ones at the bottom are the ones that I'm zoomed in here are particularly interesting. So you have 2 calls on October 26th. At this time. This particular one, it will come up later when the defense discusses it. That lasted for a minute and 28 seconds. So Trump himself didn't use personal cell phone because billionaire and was running for president. Calls would be taken through his bodyguard. So Keith Schiller would take calls, and he would hand it to Trump if it was Cohen. That's how they normally communicated. So on October 26, 2016, Cohen says that he called Keith Schiller, Keith Schiller, which we have records here, and that he spoke briefly to Schiller and asked him to hand the phone to Trump, and that he said, "Hey, boss, that I got another story about Stormy Daniels. Don't worry, I got it taken care of. I'm just looking forward if you approve me paying her off." Trump allegedly says, "Yeah, that's fine. Just take care of it," and does that. So Cohen said that he talked to Trump on multiple occasions to make sure Trump was okay with him signing off on this payment before he went ahead with this, since AMI was not willing to do it anymore. So Cohen would go to his bank and get $131,000 as a home equity loan without telling his wife. And this is how he would funnel the credit through. It was through an LLC. He took this loan out and basically lied to his bank, didn't tell them what it was actually for. And the teller, the banker who testified to the jury, said if he had known it was for hush money payment, they would not have authorized it. So Cohen had to lie to the bank, lie to his wife what this payment was for, and took out $131,000 of his own money as a loan to give to Keith Davidson, which was Stormy Daniels' attorney, and then which went to her. So after doing that, she would then sign a non-disclosure agreement, which I have pictured here, that said, on October 28th, you will not speak of this. It was signed with Donald Trump and Stephanie Clifford, which is Stormy Daniels. And so this was just to ensure her silence, that she would not speak of this affair. So we're only now about a week out before the election. So we're getting very close. So Cohen seems to have stopped a bullet from an even bigger scandal happening by making this payment of his own money and silencing this. So after this is signed, we have an interesting phone call where Cohen is talking right after this payment happens in late October to Keith Davidson, who was Stormy Daniels' attorney. And Cohen in this call is complaining that Trump doesn't seem grateful for what he did. Trump has not yet paid him back for the payment, and he's upset about it. And he makes the quote about how Trump hates that we made this payment, but I and other people told him it was the right thing to do, and he sort of accepted that. So I'll go ahead and play that and then explain why prosecutors see this as significant evidence.
Nobody's thinking about Michael. You understand? And despite what, like, for example, with the earlier conversation, and who else would do that for somebody? Who else?
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
Because I care about the guy.
Right.
And I wasn't going to play penny wise, pound foolish.
Right.
Right. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying to myself, what about me?
Yeah.
What about me? And I can't even tell you how many times he said to me, I hate the fact that we did it. And my comment to him was, but every person that you've spoken to told you it was the right move.
Right.
So prosecutors see this as interesting evidence because they are saying that this shows, at least it serves as evidence to say that Trump was, again, aware of the Stormy Daniels payments. There are the phone logs and stuff that are meant to corroborate that, but this is Cohen in a private phone call telling Keith Davidson, yeah, Trump hates that we did this, but we told him it was the right thing to do. And so this is just seen as further evidence that Trump was aware of this and was approving of it, and that this was not something that was just happening behind his back. So it's meant to imply that. And Cohen was calling Keith Davidson, according to Davidson's testimony, because he was really frustrated about not being paid back and about not getting the appreciation. So Cohen seems to be someone who wants credit, he wants approval, and he was annoyed that he hadn't been given that appreciation. And later testimony, especially from the defense, will say that Cohen really wanted a position in the White House, or at least to be considered for one, and wanted to be a staff member. And so he would call Davidson just to rant about that and was just mad. And Davidson was just surprised because Cohen would just make these random calls where he's just venting the whole time. And you can even see in that conversation, Davidson's just saying, right, yeah, not very engaged with the conversation. And Cohen's just going on and on about how upset he is about the situation. So this doesn't seem to be something that's like set out. This seems to be Cohen just laying out his grievances about not being recognized for this. So that's another important piece of audio recording that the prosecution presented to the jury. All right, so now that we've gotten past this, the actual payments themselves to Stormy Daniels and the other two, and Karen McDougal and Dino Sajudin, now we get to the actual crime. This is what Trump is actually being charged with on the 34 counts. So that was background information. Now we're getting to the actual crime. So allegedly, prosecutors are saying there was a scheme to falsify business records. So after Cohen made this payment of his own money to Trump of $131,000, We know there was a meeting in February of 2017 between Alan Weisselberg, who is the CFO of the Trump Organization, Michael Cohen, and Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump at this point had been elected president. He won the 2016 election. He's now at the White House. So we know there was a meeting in February 2017, according to emails and calendar invites, that these three were in a room meeting together about this. Now, Cohen testifies that when they were in this meeting, they discussed how to basically pay him back, and that they were going to disguise these payments as reimbursements. And so that is what we know. We know the meeting happened, and Cohen says that Trump approved and said, "Hey, you and Weisselberg figure this out. I'll agree to it, but I'll let you all figure this out, and I'll sign off on whatever you end up doing." So Trump was giving permission to say, "Yes, you can go ahead and figure out how to pay this back out of such numbers." And if that is true under New York law, that would be a misdemeanor. So to corroborate this, there is actually a bank statement with notes written on it that you can see of how they allegedly were falsifying these business records. So you can see this is the full one in the zoomed in version on the right here. $131,000. This is the bank statement that Cohen took out for his loan, home equity loan to pay Stormy Daniels, $130,000. You have on the notes here etched in Alan Weisselberg's handwriting here on the left, talking about how they're going to do this, and you have $50,000 to Red Finch Services, $180,000. We'll get to this, what this means in a minute, but this shows you Alan Weisselberg's handwriting, Michael Cohen's handwriting, both on these to show that both of them were involved in fudging these numbers. So we have another note that has the math on it to show, and this one's a little bit more specific. So I've sort of translated this chicken scratch here to the best of my ability, but it says Michael Cohen pay this January 27, 2017, bonus of $50,000. Then we get to $180,000. How do you from 50 to 180? Well, that would be 130, which happens to be the same amount that Cohen paid Stormy Daniels. And he says times 2 for taxes. Use $420,000, 1/12 every 12 times, $35,000 increments monthly from DGT, which is Donald John Trump Trust Fund, and start at $35,000 slash per month, starting on January 2017. Make to invoices. That's what these notes said. So what does all of this mean, right? So when we do the math, we see, and Cohen explains this, but this is meant to be the interpretation of it. So step one was the reimbursement. So we have the $130,000 that Cohen paid Stormy Daniels, that Trump is going to pay him back. We also have $50,000 from a separate payment that Trump made for a company called Red Finch. Red Finch was a polling company that Trump's campaign was basically paying to make some fake internet polls, and it didn't end up going well, but anyway, they owed him money. So Cohen was like, okay, you owe me for the $130,000 for Daniels payment, you owe me for the $50,000 for Red Finch. So that would give us $280,000. Now, in New York, the tax rate is 50% on higher incomes, at least on, I think, to a certain degree. So in order to offset this for taxes, because he'd have to end up paying most of that anyway, they doubled it. So they say, okay, it's going to, for 180,000, we're going to double that to 360,000. So Cohen will only be netting the original 180, but the 360 is just to offset that. So that would be illegal because he's reporting that as income when it's not. It's a reimbursement. And so he's trying to do this so he can get a better deal on his taxes. And then step three, once we're into 360,000, which you got from doubling the 180, now we add a $60,000 bonus to Cohen, which Cohen did not get in December that he was mad about. So Alan Weisberg was okay with giving him another bonus. So that gets us to $420,000. And this we derive from both the testimony of Cohen and from these documents that we have of the notes written by Alan Weisberg and Michael Cohen about how this was going on. So allegedly, this is what Trump agreed to. Trump was saying, you two figure this out. I'll agree to whatever you end up doing. And so allegedly, this is the scheme that Trump, Weisselberg, and Cohen came up with to do this. So why would they want to do these payments? Is because allegedly they did not want this to be tracked down in a paper trail. Because if Trump had just given Cohen a check for $130,000 when that was tracked and put in bank records, people would wonder, well, why is Trump reimbursing Cohen for $130,000? And if people saw the bank statement for $130,000 and they could track it to the Stormy Daniels payment, people would be able to figure out, oh, Trump is reimbursing Cohen back for the Stormy Daniels payment. And they didn't want to do that because it would basically link Trump to a crime. And so prosecutors argued that this blowing up of the numbers was meant to hide this and to make it untraceable for the average business records. So we know that after this meeting, we know these records were had, and we know that starting on February 14th, Trump would start to sign monthly checks and invoices to Michael Cohen through, Alan Weisselberg's agreement. So he would end up signing 34 documents, or he signed 9 out of 11 checks. The other 2 were signed by Alan Weisselberg and Donald Trump Jr. But Trump hand signed personally, and that's his signature, 9 of these checks. He also had invoices attached, etc. And what you know, he signs these between February and December of 2017 in $35,000 increments. And this totals up to $420,000. Now, and the invoices were attached to these checks as well. So it would say pursuant to retainer agreement. So why is this unusual that we see Trump paying all of these amounts to Cohen? Well, if you remember back to the note, it happens to match up. So prosecutors say that these are suspect for 2 main reasons. One is that these checks and invoices were labeled as a retainer agreement to Michael Cohen. So a retainer agreement is basically when you have an attorney, you give them a sum of money, let's say $5,000, and that's put in a retainer account. And then as they're giving you services by the hour, it's deducted from that total. So if you need to refill it, you can, but if there's money left over, you get that back. That's typically how a retainer works. It's for future legal services. It's not a reimbursement. It's not paying them back. That would be a bill. So they were labeled as legal fees and as a retainer agreement for Michael Cohen. So Trump was paying Cohen $35,000 a month in this retainer agreement. Cohen says that he was barely doing any work for Trump. In fact, Cohen stopped working for the Trump Organization in January 2017, and he just took on the label as Trump's personal attorney, but he didn't really have any other tasks. He had a few minor tasks with Trump's family, working out with a wax museum issue, but Cohen says he spent less than 10 hours in that whole year doing anything with the Trump family. And that really his label of personal attorney to Trump was just to help him get other connections, to have people hire him for legal services. It was more of just a title than anything else. And so you have Cohen, who apparently is doing basically no work, who's getting paid $35,000 a month, which is a little suspicious, right? Now, the bigger issue is that these payments happen to match up exactly with what we see written on these notes that were forged, right? We know that the note said that the total is going to be $420,000. Guess what? Trump paid a total of $420,000. The note said that these were going to be broken up and paid monthly. We know that these were paid monthly. The note said that these were going to be paid $35,000 each. We know that these were $35,000 each. So the fact that these line up, the math adds up perfectly, implies that, wait a minute, maybe these actually weren't retainer fees. Maybe these weren't legal fees. Maybe Trump is paying Cohen back for the payment with other, tax incentives and a bonus on top of that, and that Trump is trying to hide these payments so that they're not traceable. And so that is what prosecutors allege. The fact that these happen to line up so great with these notes that were written shows that they were intentionally falsifying these business records to hide these hush money payments because they didn't want anyone to find out that they were trying to conceal this federal elections crime. So that is what the prosecutors are alleging with the business records. Now, prosecutors also spent a lot of time quoting Trump's own writings about how much of a stickler he is. Trump, in his own books, this was a quote from Trump's book, Think Like a Billionaire, that he wrote, talking about how much of a penny pincher is. He's so stingy, he once cashed a check for 50 cents. Trump says in his book, you have to watch every check you sign. Never let any money go without knowing where it is. Negotiate, even if it's for a small amount. You always got to be on top of your money. You always have to be watching every little thing. And so prosecutors are trying to say, look, in Trump's own words, he brags about how great of a businessman is. He knew every check he was ever signing for his business. There's no way that he would be signing all these and not know what they were for. Trump says he always knows where his money is going. They also brought in testimony from people working for the Trump Organization, talking about how stingy Trump was. Even when it came to buying a frame for his mother, which was $650, they went to check with him to make sure that was okay and that wasn't too much money. And Trump would sometimes reject checks when he didn't. One of his assistants said that when he didn't want to sign something, he would take a big black Sharpie and write no or write void on it and send it back. He's like, no, I'm not paying that. That's too much. And even when he was president, people were sending him checks like, hey, do you want to renew your golf membership? And they'd have to get permission to Trump before they spent any money. So Trump was very much a tightwad when it came to his money. And so that implies, according to prosecutors, that Trump was very much aware of where this money was going, that this wasn't something that he would just happen to not know where this money was going for that. So that's the actual crime that's being alleged. We have the background, we have the crime, and now we have the fallout that prosecutors say is more information that Trump was knowingly involved in this scheme. And that was to pressure Cohen to basically stay quiet, to not tell anyone about this. And we'll see how this story evolves. So in January and February 2018, right when these payments to Cohen stopped, Wouldn't you know it, the Wall Street Journal ends up finding out about this non-disclosure agreement and they report it. Everyone finds out that Cohen paid Stormy Daniels $130,000 right before the election in order to keep her silent. Now, this looks really suspicious. And the month afterwards, the Karen McDougal payment for $150,000 would come out, and which it was said that AMI, the National Enquirer, had paid her to keep quiet about Trump's campaign. So Cohen initially, when this story came out, had denied any particular, and he denied Trump's involvement. He had said in a release statement that neither the Trump organization nor the Trump campaign was a part of the transaction with Miss Clifford, Stormy Daniels, and neither reimbursed me for the payment, either directly or indirectly. So Cohen is very explicit here in his public statement that was originally released, where he says Trump was not involved with this. Trump did not reimburse me at all. This was all on me. But as we'll see in a minute, that does not seem consistent with what everyone else was saying. So originally, Trump seems to also echo this sentiment that, nope, I didn't reimburse him. I have no idea. I didn't know about this payment. I don't know what's going on. Wasn't aware of it at all. In an interview on April 5th on Air Force One, Trump would tell a reporter that he just didn't know where these payments were. And here's our next footage of evidence. So Trump says, no, I didn't know about it. You'll have to talk to Michael. And they said, do you know where he got the money? He said, nope, I don't know where he got the money. So Trump is pretty adamant here that he's denying that Cohen, that he was involved in this at all. This was all up to Cohen. Cohen did this. According to the testimony of Hope Hicks, Trump's former advisor, Trump had told her after the story came out that Michael Cohen had made a payment to help protect his campaign and that he did this because he loved Trump so much and was so loyal. And when asked about this, Hope Hicks said she didn't believe that. She actually thought Trump was lying to her because she said that she didn't think Michael Cohen was a very selfless person. He was someone who wanted credit, who loved attention. And so she didn't think that Michael Cohen is someone who would do this out of the goodness of his own heart just to protect Trump without Trump having known about it or been involved in it in some way. So things get worse for Cohen. In April 9th, just a few days after this question was asked, the FBI raids his home, and he is now under federal investigation for campaign finance violations for making this payment to Stormy Daniels. Things are not looking good. So as he is sorting through this legal trouble, Cohen tries to get the help of attorneys to get him out of all the situation. So Cohen gets in contact with attorney Bob Costello to help him with this FBI investigation, and the prosecution has several emails brought between Costello and Michael Cohen. Now, Costello was actually brought as a defense witness to testify that Cohen had told Costello that he did not know that Trump was not involved in this, so this was all his idea. But the prosecution on cross-examination brought out some of these emails to say that it looked very much like how Michael Cohen interpreted it, that this was sort of a back channel, that Costello was very closely affiliated with Rudy Giuliani, who we'll get to in a second. Rudy Giuliani, who was Trump's attorney, another one of Trump's attorneys, and that they were basically communicating with the president to Michael Cohen. And so you have this connection here that Costello is basically implying that, hey, we have connection to the president, so just be on your best behavior. And this is where the prosecutors led that there is this pressure campaign on Cohen, that Trump is very much involved in this moment, that he's very much involved trying to say, hey, Michael, you better not cooperate with these guys, better not get involved. And that, according to prosecutors, implies that Trump was worried that Cohen was going to give information that would be damaging to Trump, and Trump did not want that. So we have an email here. The most notable part about this is where he says, he talked about Giuliani. He says he called it crucial, noted how reassured they were that someone like me, whom Rudy has known for so many years, is in this role. Sleep well tonight. You have friends in high places. P.S. Some very positive comments from you about the White House. So we have Costello telling Cohen, hey, talk to Rudy Giuliani, Trump's attorney. Don't worry, you have friends in high places, and the White House has very positive things to say about you. Okay. We have another email written the same day where he talks to him again about how he talked to Rudy Giuliani, and he says, he asked me to tell you that he knows how tough it is on you and your family, and he will make sure to tell the president. He said, thank you for opening this back channel of communication and asked me to keep in touch. I told him we'd be speaking to you further. So again, this is another email where Bob is telling Michael Cohen, like, hey, don't worry, we got this. We're in contact with the president. You'll be okay. So again, this is showing implicitly that Trump and Trump's attorneys seem to be very much involved with this situation as Cohen is trying to steer away from the FBI. The same day that email was sent, Trump happens to tweet out a defense of Cohen where he talks about how people were saying Cohen was going to flip on Trump and that he was going to cooperate with negotiators and try to implicate Trump. And Trump is saying, I don't think that's going to happen. Trump says here, Michael, a fine person with a wonderful family. Michael's a businessman for his own account lawyer who I've always liked and respected. Most people would flip if the government lets them out of trouble, even if it means lying or making up stories. Sorry, I don't see Michael doing that despite the horrible witch hunt and dishonest media. So Trump seems to be supporting this idea that, oh, Michael's not going to flip, don't worry. Now, when Michael Cohen testifies, he says that he interpreted this tweet as sort of an implicit threat where Trump was basically dangling a pardon in front of him saying, hey, you better not cooperate or else I might not pardon you. So just remember, you're not going to flip, Michael. Don't flip. So all of this happened. So far, Cohen has denied Trump was involved in this publicly. Trump publicly denied that he had anything to do with these payments. But we now get a contradiction in stories because Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, who we mentioned earlier, on May 2nd, would go on an interview with Sean Hannity and seem to accidentally imply that Trump, in fact, did pay Cohen back for this. This is the first time that people had heard about this. Trump apparently paid Cohen back for the Stormy Daniels payments, and Giuliani also says that Trump had basically disguised these as retainer payments, even though, to quote Giuliani, Michael Cohen wasn't really doing much work for him. And so Giuliani in this video will say, yeah, you know, Cohen was being paid back by Trump by these retainer payments, even though he wasn't doing any work. And there was a little bit of touch up there for taxes and for profit, but it wasn't campaign related, so it's fine. And this was a bombshell report at the time that seemed to go against everything that both Cohen and Trump had said. And damage control soon went forth. But let's go ahead and watch this video when Rudy Giuliani would admit this publicly for the first time.
They funneled it through the law firm. Funneled through the law firm, and the president repaid it.
The president's lawyer and longtime supporter, Rudy Giuliani, dropping a bombshell on Fox News, claiming that the president repaid his personal attorney, Michael Cohen, for the $130,000 payment to porn star Stormy Daniels in a hush agreement to silence her about an alleged sexual affair she had with President Trump back in 2006.
I said, 130,000. You're gonna do a couple of checks for 130,000. When I heard Cohen's retainer of 35,000, when he was doing no work for the president, I said, that's how he's repaying. That's how he's repaying it, with a little profit and a little margin for paying taxes.
But Giuliani adding the payment was perfectly legal.
That money was not campaign money. Sorry, I'm giving you a fact now that you don't know. It's not campaign money. No campaign finance violation.
So not only does this seem to contradict what Trump and Cohen both said, where they publicly denied Trump's involvement in this, but this also seemed to correspond exactly with that document that we saw earlier about the $420,000 that was paid in $35,000 increments in a retainer agreement. Giuliani here seems to be confirming what prosecutors suspected, that these were actually not retainer agreements. They were reimbursements that were illegally and falsely labeled in order to hide the payments that Trump was reimbursing. And so the day after this interview comes out, Trump would seem to tweet out a reversal of his original position to say Mr. Cohen, an attorney, received a monthly retainer, not from the campaign and having nothing to do with the campaign, from which he entered into through reimbursement a private contract between these two parties known as a non-disclosure agreement or NDA. Trump goes on to say that NDAs are normal among celebrities, which is true, they are, but they're not normal in campaigns. They can't be used in campaigns to influence campaigns. That is when they go from being legal to illegal. But this is interesting because Trump originally said, no, I didn't know about the payments at all. I don't know where Cohen got the money to pay her back. And now the day after Rudy Giuliani seems to say that Trump did pay him back, Trump now is saying that these were reimbursed. It's not clear from this tweet if Trump is saying that he knew they were reimbursements at the time or that he was paying it. But the tweet doesn't really make sense because you don't reimburse through a retainer. A retainer is for future or present legal services. It is not to pay back for legal services that have already been going on. So it's almost contradictory to even have in the tweet a reimbursement through a retainer, unless, of course, that retainer isn't actually a retainer and it's falsely labeled as a retainer. So Trump seems to prosecutors argue that Trump is sort of implicating himself here by admitting this was a reimbursement disguised as a retainer agreement. And so a few days after that tweet comes out, we now see on the Trump Organization's financial disclosures in this footnote here, a mention of a reimbursement to Michael Cohen. saying, in the interest of transparency, while not required to be disclosed as reportable liabilities, in Part 8 in 2016, expenses were incurred by one Donald J. Trump's attorneys, Michael Cohen. Mr. Cohen sought reimbursement of those expenses, and Mr. Trump fully reimbursed Mr. Cohen in 2017. The category value would be $100,000 to $250,000, and the interest would be zero. Now, Trump's organization did not report this in 2017 when these payments were being given out. The only time we see this listed was in the days after this became public that Trump had reimbursed Cohen. And so it's interesting to see sort of the reversal on this again, and to see Trump's own documents, which he did sign off on this financial disclosure form, that they were accurate, mentioned that Trump apparently did reimburse Cohen. And so prosecutors say, look, this is evidence from Trump's own words and the words of his attorneys that these were reimbursements in the case, and these were not just retainer agreements. We now have more emails. I don't have actual photos of the emails, but these are from the media releases from what the prosecutors were doing on cross-examination of Bob Costello, quoting exactly what these emails said. So we continue to have this pressure campaign by Bob Costello on Michael Cohen, allegedly. We have Costello telling Cohen in an email, quote, "You're making a very big mistake if you believe these stories these journalists are writing about you. They want you to cave. They want you to fail. They do not want you to persevere or succeed. If you really believe you are not being supported properly by your former boss, which would be Donald Trump, then you should make your opinion known." So again, this seems to be an email implying that there is pressure on Cohen not to flip, and that if there was anything that if Cohen didn't feel like Trump was supporting him in this matter, that he should let him know, which again implies that Trump was very much involved in this campaign to not get Cohen to flip, showing that Trump was very much interested in the outcome of this prosecution. We have another email that Costello now writes to his law partner, not to Michael Cohen, where he seems to be complaining about Cohen and says that, look, we need to make it look that we're not getting orders from the president. He says the right idea is to have Cohen on the right page without giving him the appearance that we are following instructions from Giuliani or from the president. In my opinion, that's a clear and correct strategy. Now, this is pretty damning because it implies heavily that Costello and Giuliani are taking direct orders from the president, and that they're trying to put this on Cohen. And so again, this shows that there's a back channel where Trump is directly communicating and has his thumb on Cohen, according to prosecutors, getting him not to flip. And why is Trump so interested in having Cohen not flip and not tell prosecutors what he knows? Because, according to prosecutors, Trump was involved in this scheme and does not want Cohen to implicate him. And perhaps what's the most damning of these emails we have from June 22nd, another email that Costello writes to Citron. He says, "Tune in to CNN and see how they are playing this up. He," which is referring to Cohen, "has to know this just as he continues to slow play us and the president. What should I say about this a-hole? He is playing with the most powerful man on the planet." This seems to be the most clear indication of Costello connecting this to say he's messing with Trump if he's going to be giving into this. Media's reporting he might flip if he does this. How dare he? Doesn't he know he's messing with the president? This again implies that Trump is very much involved in this, and that Trump might be waving a pardon in front of Cohen's face and trying to not get Cohen to flip. And so Trump seems to very much want to be involved in this campaign against Cohen right now, which might imply that Trump himself was implicit in the crime, according to prosecutors. Now, that audio recording that we'd heard between Trump and Cohen that was secretly recorded about the Karen McDougal payments was released in July 2018. And Trump takes to Twitter to complain about this, and he says, how dare the FBI collect these recordings, and how dare Michael Cohen record me without my knowledge? That could be illegal. So Trump starts to be souring on Cohen. He had very nice things to say about him in other tweets, but now he seems to start to really be putting pressure and be like, that was, to show his disinterest in Cohen now. This would only become worse when Cohen would plead guilty to multiple counts on August 21st, 2018. Cohen pled guilty for campaign finance violations, to tax fraud when he received those reimbursements as income that he inflated, and he also pleaded guilty to fraud with a private business that was unrelated to this case, a taxicab business that he had also committed fraud in. And so when Cohen pled fraud now, he directly reversed his original position. In January and February, Cohen had said, Trump did not reimburse me, Trump did not direct me, Trump was not involved. Now we have Cohen saying, I was acting in coordination with and at the direction of a candidate for federal office. Now, some people might say that this is Cohen flipping because he wanted to get back at Trump. Now that he's mad, he's trying to drag Trump down with him. And so people who distrust Cohen might say that Cohen is changing his story because he just wants to get Trump to go to prison with him. But you'll remember that we had that audio recording of Cohen calling Keith Davidson saying how Trump was upset that we made this payment and he hates that we did it, but we told him it was the right thing to do and that he was aware of it. And so you see this back and forth. You have private conversations where Cohen is telling lawyers that Trump was aware of these payments. Then you have public statements where Cohen was denying that Trump was aware of these payments. And then when Cohen pleads guilty, he now goes back to saying, yes, Trump was aware of these payments and coordinated them and told me to do it. So it's interesting to see the difference between the private calls that Trump has with Cohen and with Keith Davidson, and then the public statements that Cohen releases where he seems to try to distance Trump from it. So Cohen would say that when he was lying, he was protecting Trump originally, and when he said that Trump had no involvement, but now he had severed ties with Trump at this point. The day after Cohen pled guilty, Trump would go into Twitter and show his disfavor. He said, if anyone's looking for a good lawyer, I would strongly suggest you do not retain the services of Michael Cohen, which seems very bitter, and clearly Trump is no longer in good favor with Michael Cohen for flipping on prosecutors. Last video I'm going to show here is where Trump would say in an interview the day after this tweet and 2 days after the prosecution of Michael Cohen, where Trump would again seem to admit that he at some point did know about these payments and that he did pay Cohen back, where he says the money came from me and not from my campaign. Let's watch.
It came from me, and I tweeted about it. I don't know if you know.
Oh, it was a little early there. We'll go back a few seconds.
Nobody understands. I watched a number of shows. Sometimes you get some pretty good information by watching shows. Those 2 counts aren't even a crime. They weren't campaign finance.
Did you know about the payments?
Later on, I knew. Later on. But you have to understand, Ainsley, what he did, and they weren't taken out of campaign finance. That's a big thing. That's a much bigger thing. Did they come out of the campaign? They didn't come out of the campaign. They came from me, and I tweeted about it. I don't know if you know, but I tweeted about the payments, but they didn't come out of campaign. In fact, my first question when I heard about it was, did they come out of the campaign? Because that could be a little dicey.
A little dicey is putting it shortly. So Trump denies they came out of the campaign. He says there was no wrongdoing, there was no crime, but he does say that at some point later on, he did know about the payments, and that the payments didn't come from the campaign; they came from me, which seems to imply that Trump was paying Cohen back for these payments, which is implicitly Trump is implicating himself that these again were reimbursements, which he seemed to have originally denied back in April. So in September now we have AMI, National Enquirer. Where have they been in this whole thing? Well, prosecutors would make them sign a non-prosecutorial agreement where they would not go to prison. They did have to pay a fine, but they had to basically admit wrongdoing to say that yes, we were making illegal campaign contributions to Trump's campaign. We were hiding stories with Karen McDougal and Dino Sejuda, and that we're basically breaking the law. And so this does not implicate Trump directly, because you cannot use this to say that Trump himself committed a crime, but it does show that National Enquirer, as part of this scheme, that they did consider these payments to be campaign contributions, and that therefore there was a breaking of the law. So here's the non-prosecutorial agreement for that. And then we have, to close out the prosecution's case, more tweets from Trump where he basically says, I never directed Michael Cohen to break the law. He was a lawyer and he's supposed to do this on his own. And Trump basically just says how Cohen, should have known this as a lawyer. It's not clear whether he's saying that I never directed Cohen to make any payments, or whether he's saying I did direct Cohen to make the payments, but it wasn't illegal. When he says I never directed Michael Cohen to break the law, did he direct Michael Cohen at all, and it just wasn't illegal, or did he not even direct Michael Cohen whatsoever? It's not clear from his tweets what he's saying here. And you also have Trump saying on December 16th, 3 days later after that he calls Michael Cohen a rat for ratting him out and for going to the FBI and implicating him, where Cohen pleads guilty and says, oh yeah, Trump made me do it. Trump clearly has animosity towards that. So this is further evidence of this treacherous campaign. So that is the summary of the prosecution's main case. This, obviously, I didn't present all the evidence, the 20 witnesses, but this was what collectively they sort of described. So to give a summary of that, the prosecution wants to have these main things in the timeline. One is that Trump and Cohen had this scheme with David Pecker and AMI to have the National Enquirer buy out harmful stories and promote helpful stories for Trump's campaign, which would be considered an in-kind campaign contribution and would technically be illegal in a violation of federal campaign finance law. Now, the New York DA cannot prosecute on federal election law. That is up for federal prosecutors, and federal prosecutors never press charges against Trump for this. So state prosecutors in New York are not charging Trump for violating federal election law. They are, however, charging him with violating business records law by falsifying them in accordance to hide a second crime, which was federal election law, which they can do. So that's that. The second point is that Michael Cohen paid $130,000 to Stormy Daniels. That's not contested because there's plenty of documentary evidence of that. We have the bank statements. The only question is whether Trump directed Cohen to do this or whether Cohen did this on his own accord. Prosecutors say, look, we have call logs showing that Cohen had discussed this. We also have video of Cohen and Trump discussing a different payment to Karen McDougal, so we know Trump was involved in that payment. So it's not a stretch to think Trump was involved in the Stormy Daniels payment. And they'll also say, look, it's very unlikely that Cohen would take $130,000 of his own money as a loan without telling his wife in the hopes to just pay this off and never tell Trump, because Cohen, as Hope Hicks had testified to, is someone who likes attention. He wanted a position in the White House. He wanted to get promoted. He wanted a bonus. And if Cohen wants this, how great of a motivation would it be to say, look, Trump, this is what I did for you. I took out my own money. I did all of this to help your campaign to do this. It doesn't make much sense, according to prosecutors, that Cohen would do this of his own volition without ever telling Trump, and didn't expect any payment in return, didn't expect any promotions, didn't expect anything. Cohen just did out of the kindness of his heart. To many people, that seems very far-fetched, and it seems more likely that Trump would have known about it and would have approved of it and would have probably agreed to pay him back or at least give him some kind of benefit in order for doing it. Then we know that there was a meeting in February 2017 where Alan Weisselberg, Michael Cohen, and Trump met in the White House, and we know that out of that meeting we have those notes written on those bank statements that talk about forging payments, and we know that the payments made by Trump that were signed by Trump for $420,000 total over the course of 12 months to Michael Cohen happened to line up exactly with the notes written on this document that happened to come out of that meeting. And so one can make the inference to say that, Michael Cohen says that Trump approved of him and Weisselberg falsifying these payments, and that's what the notes are. So whether or not one believes them is another story, but we at least have the documentary evidence to say that these were falsified, most likely. These notes happen to line up exactly with the payments that Trump signed on to, and that those notes discussing the falsification payments came out of that meeting in 2017. So it's not direct evidence besides Cohen's testimony, but it is a lot of circumstantial evidence where you can make a pretty good leap to say that. And of course, prosecutors point out again that Trump was very much aware of where all of his money was going. He was a tightwad. He was stingy. He wouldn't just be signing checks and not knowing where they were going. Last point is that prosecutors say that Trump was pressuring Cohen not to flip when the FBI was investigating him. Trump goes from tweeting very nice things about Cohen. Oh, Cohen's not going to flip. Cohen's loyal. Cohen's a great guy. And we have these emails behind the scenes with Costello, who's connected to Trump's attorneys, saying, hey, don't worry, you got friends in high places. Hey, Michael, you better not flip. How dare you? Do you know who you're messing with? You're messing with the president. Oh, we have to make it look like we're not taking orders from the president. Prosecutors say this is all evidence that Trump was very much involved in this, and Trump did not want Cohen to flip because this was a conspiracy. This was a scheme. Trump was involved. Alan Weisselberg was involved, and Michael Cohen was involved. And everyone knows when in conspiracy, when one person flips, they can implicate the other people involved in the conspiracy. So Trump was involved, not wanting Cohen to flip, because prosecutors argue Cohen did not want him to implicate him and say that he was doing anything illegal. And of course, that's what Cohen did when he pled guilty. He said Trump was behind this and was directing him to do it. So that's the prosecution's case. Now, what's the defense's case? Now, this is a lot shorter because the defense does not have to present evidence. The prosecution has the burden of proof. Trump is presumed innocent. Trump is, presumed innocent until he is proven guilty. So the defense does not even have to put on a case. They don't have to call witnesses. They only called 2 witnesses, and one of them was just managerial. So really only one witness, which was Rob Costello. But I have broken down the defense's case really into four parts from what was discussed in the trial. So first one was that Trump was unaware of the falsification record scheme. Now, defense attorneys also argued that there just was not a scheme at all, that these might have been legal payments that Trump was just paying, that they were retainer agreements. And so there was no even need to say that these were falsified. But even if they were, for the sake of argument, there's no reason to think that Trump was aware of it. Although Trump does brag a lot about how much he watches his money and how much of a CEO he was, most of that is quoted and relevant to when he was a businessman before he was elected president. But after he was elected president, we have the testimony of several Trump officials on this, it was a lot more hectic. They would have to FedEx checks to the White House from New York, and then they had to get FedEx back. And Trump was also often very busy. And I believe it was Madeline Westerhout, when she was testifying, mentioned under cross-examination that she would sometimes see Trump on the phone signing checks with a pile, not really looking at what they are and just going through them. And so the defense says, look, it's plausible that given how busy Trump was, that this was hectic. We know this process was complicated. Trump was just signing things, not really paying attention to where the money was going. And so, and we have some, evidence of this through testimony and so forth. So another point is that Trump did not actually personally fill out the ledger himself. So in a big business, the CEO is not there writing all of the accounting information. That's the accountant's jobs. And so the actual reference to retainer agreements and legal expenses was done by Alan Weisselberg, or the accountants at the direction of Alan Weisselberg, which we know through emails. But Trump himself did not say, "Hey, I want you to label this as a retainer agreement." And so, to show that Trump willfully actually knew that these were false records and that that was a false label and that these were reimbursements, defense says the prosecution has not met their burden in that. It is perfectly plausible to think that Trump was just not involved in this, or he just didn't know much about it and wasn't intentionally trying to falsify anything. He was just busy as being president, and that this was done maybe by Alan Weisselberg or by Cohen, but Trump was not very much involved despite having signed the checks himself and may have just been incidentally. Further evidence of this point is the fact that Cohen under oath would admit that he stole money from Trump in these very payments. We mentioned earlier that part of these payments, including the $130,000 to Stormy Daniels, there was $50,000 to Red Finch, which was a company, a polling company. Cohen had originally paid them $20,000 to make this poll. But when he was being reimbursed, he had told Alan Weisselberg that it was $50,000. And so Cohen gets paid the $50,000. He pays Red Finch $20,000. He pockets the $30,000. So he makes Trump pay $30,000 more than what he actually should have been owed. And so that would be larceny, which is actually a more serious crime than what Trump is being charged with here. And so this is evidence, one, that Cohen is a very dishonest person, which we'll get to, but also evidence that Trump really might not have been fully aware of what these reimbursements were, because obviously Trump isn't going to consent to him being ripped off and being stolen. So would Trump really, as a penny pincher, knowingly give that much money to Cohen? No. So the fact that Cohen was able to basically trick Trump into paying him $30,000 extra with the Red Finch payment might bring doubt as to the other payments. What do we think about the rest of these reimbursements? Is it possible that Trump just wasn't aware of what these were? Because as we've just seen, Cohen was able to rip him off so much. That's evidence that Trump was not fully in the know about what exactly this repayment scheme was all about. Another point is that, and this is the defense's main point, defense 2, is that Michael Cohen is a terrible witness and is horribly, horribly untrustworthy. And the prosecution's case, according to them, rests a lot on Michael Cohen. Now, the prosecution will say, look, we've corroborated everything Michael Cohen has said. We have documents, we have evidence, we have the notes written on the records, we have phone calls, we have emails, we have voice recordings, we have everything to corroborate everything Michael Cohen has said. The defense will say, yes, but look, the actual crime of falsification of business records, the only person in that meeting who testified in that February 2017 meeting where the records were allegedly falsified or schemed to be falsified is Cohen. And Cohen cannot be trusted. Why can't he be trusted? Because Cohen has pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud, including not just with Trump's campaign, which Cohen says he was lying on behalf of Trump, but other things that didn't even involve Trump. Cohen had his own taxi cab business that was fraudulent, that didn't involve Trump, that he pled guilty to. Cohen has also pled guilty to perjury, which is lying under oath, which is really bad when you have a witness on the stand for a trial. In fact, a judge in this case called Michael Cohen, not the judge, and not in this case, in the separate case where Michael Cohen was pleading guilty to tax fraud, said that Michael Cohen was committing perjury there too, because Cohen contradicted his story later on and said, oh, no, I actually never did commit tax fraud, even though he pled guilty to it. So either he's pleading guilty now, or either he's committing perjury now or he's committing perjury then. So Michael Cohen just sort of had a reputation of being a serial liar who would constantly be making up stuff in order to benefit himself. Cohen is also a very compromised witness because he constantly is talking about how much he wants Trump to go to prison. He's a biased witness. He clearly has a vendetta against Trump because he went to prison and Trump didn't. And he now sells merch with Trump. This is just one example of Trump's figure behind prison. Cohen has his own podcast where he goes constantly on about how much he wants Trump to be put in jail. The defense played a clip from one of these podcasts where Cohen is screaming expletives about how he wants Trump to be put in an effing cage like an animal and rot in prison, to show that Cohen is very biased. Cohen has so much incentive for Trump to go to prison. Cohen sells merch off of this. And Cohen is now disbarred because he pled guilty to crimes. He is not an attorney anymore. This is how he makes money, is by doing podcasts and writing books about how much Trump is guilty and how Trump needs to go to jail. So this is all evidence that Cohen has such a hate against Trump that he cannot be a reliable witness. He's so biased. He will say anything, make any lie in order to make Trump look bad. And since the prosecution's case has a lot of bearing on whether you trust Cohen or not, it's not looking too good. There's enough reasonable doubt there. Another point is that Cohen's motive was also there. He was also bitter towards Trump because Trump didn't give him a position in the White House like he was wanting. We know this from Keith Davidson, some of these phone calls. Cohen was just calling to vent about how mad he was that Trump didn't give him this position. So this would be even further reason to hate Trump. And so this all just adds to Cohen's discredibility. So we know that Cohen has a history of lying, including perjury and fraud. And we know that Cohen is very much of a vendetta against Trump. He's a very problematic witness, and the defense will constantly point that out, that you cannot convict Trump on the testimony of Michael Cohen. Last point about Cohen being untrustworthy is that the prosecution was seemingly able to catch Cohen in a contradiction during his testimony. So if you remember back to the call logs, Cohen said that he had called Keith Schiller, who was Trump's bodyguard, in October right before he made the Stormy Daniels payment to get Trump's permission to have Trump sign off on it. And so he calls Keith Davidson. He says, hey, can you pass the phone to Trump? He talks to Trump for a few moments. Trump allegedly signs off on it. That's what Cohen says. But when you look at the call records on October 26, especially this call at that lasted for a minute and 28 seconds, we know from the text messages that precede that call apparently was not actually about that. When you look at the text messages, Cohen was getting prank calls from a 14-year-old kid, and Cohen was upset and was wanting to have the Secret Service look into them, or the FBI, and was wanting to do it. So he texts Keith Schiller, according to these text messages, hey, Keith, how do I get rid of this prank caller? Keith Schiller then says, call me. Radford says, call me. We have the call log when that's done. After the call is done, after 90 seconds, Cohen texts the number of the kid to Keith Schiller. So the defense says, look, Cohen, from what we can tell from the text messages, this call had nothing to do with Donald Trump or Stormy Daniels. You said that you were calling Keith Schiller to discuss the Stormy Daniels payment with Trump. No, you were calling Keith Schiller to discuss this prank caller, and this had nothing to do with Donald Trump. Cohen would respond to this by saying, well, it was both. I called Keith Schiller about this, and then right after I got done talking this for a few seconds, I asked if the boss was there. Schiller said yes, and so he hands the phone and says, hey, boss, I got the Stormy Daniels thing taken care of. Trump says okay. And the defense says you did all of that in 90 seconds. Now, take in mind that the recording where Cohen is discussing the Karen McDougal payment that we have in audio, the actual part of that clip that involves Karen McDougal and the payment lasts for roughly 30 seconds or so. So prosecution might say it's not implausible to say that that whole thing could have been done in a minute and 30 seconds. But the prosecution responded to this by having a photo of Keith Schiller next to Donald Trump 4 minutes before this call happened during a C-SPAN of one of Trump's rallies. Trump had just finished the rally. There's a screenshot of Keith Schiller standing next to Trump. And then 4 minutes later, we know that the call between Schiller and Cohen happened. So prosecutors responded to this by saying, look, it's not implausible because we know Trump was right next to Schiller at the time. So it's consistent with what Cohen is saying. It's perfectly consistent to say that Schiller handed the phone to Trump because he was right next to him right before this happened, and that they talked for a few minutes. It does not prove that Cohen actually did talk with Trump. We can't prove that just from the call records, but prosecutors say it's at least consistent with what Cohen says. But again, if you already have reason to distrust Michael Cohen, the fact that there's an alleged contradiction here in his testimony on the stand may give one reason to doubt the veracity of his claim. Some smaller points, those were the two big ones. I think some of the smaller points the defense might point out on the second point regarding the undisclosed crime, right? Were these campaign finance violations? Hope Hicks and others implied that Trump may have been doing this because he had Melania in mind, that no, he wasn't making these hush money payments to conceal anything with the election, that Trump would have done this anyway, that Trump was doing this to protect his wife because he would have been embarrassed that Melania would have to hear these stories that Trump denies, and that's not true, and that he wouldn't need to cover up. So if Trump was doing this in order to protect his family and not because of his campaign, then these would not be considered campaign finance violations anymore. And of course, I think another big point that the defense can raise is what's called the missing witness charge. So much of the prosecution's case rests on the idea that Alan Weisselberg, which was the CFO of Trump's organization and is pictured here, was collaborating with Michael Cohen and Trump to falsify these business records. Well, Weisselberg was never called as a witness. Weisselberg is currently in prison for committing perjury for lying on behalf of the Trump organization, and he also went to prison prior to this for committing tax fraud for the Trump organization. So he's not there to testify. But the defense can say, look, the prosecution could have called Alan Weisselberg to confirm anything that Cohen says, and they didn't. Why? Well, you're allowed to infer that maybe the reason the prosecution didn't call on Weisselberg is because Weisselberg would have disagreed with them and would have countered and contradicted Cohen's testimony about what happened in that meeting. And so the defense is always allowed to say, hey, if the prosecution didn't call so-and-so witness when they should have, that means the prosecution is trying to hide something and that they know the testimony wouldn't have agreed with them. And so that's one point. Another witness they can bring up is Keith Schiller, Trump's bodyguard. They could have gotten this whole phone records thing worked out if they just had Keith Schiller testify and say, yep, I was there and that's what Cohen said. But the prosecution doesn't want to call Keith Schiller. Are they hiding something? Do they know that Keith Schiller would go against what Cohen is saying as well? Defense can raise that as an objection. The defense can say, well, look, we can put witnesses on, but we don't have to. We don't have the burden of proof, especially when you have potential cross-examination. It's always risky to put a witness on. So the defense doesn't have to put Weisselberg and Schiller on for them. They can call out the prosecution and say, look, you didn't call them as witnesses. So it establishes a reasonable doubt. So that is a summation of both the prosecution and the defense's cases. So in summary, the legal question, probably what the juror will be asked to figure out are two main points. One, did the prosecution demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump knowingly ordered or participated in the scheme to falsify business records? And if the answer to that is no, then there is no charge at all. If the answer to that is yes, now we're at a misdemeanor. Now we can get it bumped up to a felony if number two is also true. If so, did the prosecution demonstrate that Trump's falsification of business records was done in order to conceal a potential second crime, which would probably be campaign finance, election law related crimes? If the answer to the second question is no, but the first question is yes, then it's just a misdemeanor. If both questions are answered yes, then it's a felony and Trump could get prison time. So with that, I hope that was helpful. I know that was a little long-winded, but I wanted to be very thorough and I wanted to give both sides. So hopefully you're able to get a good summary of the evidence. And again, this is just a summary. It's obviously not everything that was presented, but we only can do it recording for so long. So just whatever you think of Donald Trump, whatever you think of the justice system, just look at this and come to your own conclusions, follow this closely. As of recording, we are likely to get a verdict probably sometime this week or early next week. And whatever that verdict is, it's sure to change the history of America forever. So come to your own conclusions. Thanks so much for watching. And until next time, you've been watching Caleb Jackson. Take care.